28 men trapped in the Antarctic Ocean. Their ship crushed by millions of tons of ice. For 7 months, they've been frozen in place, unable to move forward, unable to turn back. Then one night, a sound from beneath the ship, a violent crack. The vessel lurches to one side. Something massive has just struck them from below. What happens next is beyond anything they could have imagined, beyond anything anyone has ever survived. This is the story of the Endurance expedition, the story of Sir Ernest Shackleton and 27 men who spent 2 years battling the most hostile environment on Earth. No rescue, no communication, no hope of survival. And yet, every single one of them made it home alive. To understand this story, you first need to understand the man who led it. Sir Ernest Shackleton was born in 1874 in Ireland. From childhood, he was obsessed with one thing: exploration. Specifically, he wanted to conquer Antarctica, the last unconquered continent on Earth. In 1901, Shackleton joined his first Antarctic expedition, taking 460 miles of the South Pole before turning back. Failure. In 1907, he tried again. This time, he came within just 97 miles of the South Pole. So close, but once again, failure. By 1911, Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen had reached the South Pole first. The race was over. Shackleton had lost. But Ernest Shackleton wasn't the type of man to give up. In 1914, he announced a new plan. If he couldn't be first to reach the South Pole, he would be first to cross the entire Antarctic continent on foot, over 1,800 miles of the most brutal terrain on the planet. He called it the Imperial Transantarctic Expedition. And he named his ship ... Endurance. The name was deliberate. This mission would test human endurance to its absolute limit. Here's the problem. Nobody wanted to go. Antarctica in 1914 was a death sentence. Temperatures dropped to -100 degrees Fahrenheit. Winds reached 200 miles per hour. Frostbite, starvation, and crushing ice were all but guaranteed. So Shackleton placed an advertisement in the Times newspaper. But this wasn't your typical job posting. It read, "Men wanted for hazardous journey. Low wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success." Over 5,000 men applied. Think about that. Shackleton promised hardship, danger, and possible death. And thousands of people volunteered anyway. He selected 27 men, scientists, sailors, photographers, carpenters, the best crew he could assemble. But there was a problem. Just as preparations were finalizing, World War I erupted across Europe. Britain declared war on Germany in August 1914. Everyone assumed the expedition would be cancelled. National resources would be needed for the war effort. Shackleton himself telegraphed the British Admiralty, offering to cancel the expedition and place his ship and crew at the government's disposal. The response came from Winston Churchill himself, who was First Lord of the Admiralty at the time. Proceed. One word. That's all it took. On August 8, 1914, the Endurance departed from Plymouth, England. The ship itself was extraordinary. Built in Norway from thick American oak, it was specifically designed to withstand crushing ice pressure. It had both sails and a coal-fired steam engine, a hybrid vessel capable of navigating the most treacherous waters on Earth, or so they thought. The journey south took 4 months. First, they sailed across the Atlantic to Buenos Aires, Argentina, then further south to South Georgia Island, a remote whaling station in the subantarctic. On December 5, 1914, they left South Georgia and headed into the Weddell Sea. On board, 28 men and 69 Canadian sled dogs. The dogs would be essential for hauling supplies across the ice once they reached Antarctica. For 46 days, the Endurance sailed through increasingly thick pack ice. The crew could see Antarctica in the distance. They were close. Just one more day of sailing, and they would reach Vassal-Bavair landing point. But on January 18, 1915, disaster struck. The ice thickened dramatically. What had been navigable channels became solid sheets of pack ice 18 feet thick in some places. The Enduran pushed forward, its reinforced bow cutting through the ice. But the ice was too thick. The ship slowed. Then stop. They were stuck, just 80 miles from their destination. At first, they weren't worried. Shackleton ordered the crew to try manually freeing the ship. For 2 days, they hacked at the ice with saws, picks, and shovels. They tried pushing the 350-ton vessel forward with their bare hands. After days of back-breaking labor, they had moved the ship 300 yards. Then it froze again. They tried 4 weeks. But the ice was too thick, too strong. On February 14th, 1915, exactly 1 month after getting stuck, Shackleton made a decision. They would wait for the ice to break up naturally. Spring was coming. Surely the ice would melt, and they could continue their journey. So the Endurance became a winter station. The crew settled into a routine. Morning exercises on the ice, scientific observations, soccer games, haircuts. They took turns being barbers, evening discussions, and card games. Morale was surprisingly high. Shackleton was a master of keeping spirits up. He maintained strict discipline, but also encouraged camaraderie. The men bonded with each other, and even with the sled dogs. But nature had other plans. In April 1915, something unexpected happened. The ice didn't melt. Instead, it began compressing. Here's what you need to understand. Pack ice isn't static. It moves with ocean currents and winds. And when millions of tons of ice move, they exert unimaginable pressure on anything caught between them. The ice surrounding the Endurance began squeezing the ship. At first, it was just creaking sounds. Then the ice started piling up against the hull, massive slabs, stacking on top of each other like building blocks. The crew worked frantically to relieve the pressure, shoveling away ice, cutting channels. But it was like trying to stop an avalanche with your hands. On July 14th, 1915, the crew heard a sound from beneath the ship. A loud crack. The Endurance lurched violently to one side. Morning revealed the damage. The root of the ship's steering mechanism had been completely torn off. They had now been trapped for 7 months. Te Were Aubert, 1,200 miles from the nearest human settlement. No radio. No way to call for help. Their only hope was Shackleton's leadership. October 18th, 1915. The ice pressure intensified. Suddenly, the Endurance tilted 30 degrees to one side. Water began pouring through cracks in the hull. The crew worked through the night, pumping water, trying to save their ship. But on October 27th, Shackleton gave the order no captain wants to give. Abandon ship. They had 9 months of supplies, 3 lifeboats, the sled dogs, and their personal belongings. Everything was hauled onto the ice. And then they watched. The ice continued crushing the Endurance. The wooden hull, reinforced to withstand polar conditions, groaned and splintered. Planks shattered like toothpicks. On November 21st, 1915, the Endurance finally succumbed. The ship sank beneath the ice, taking with it their shelter, their home, and any hope of completing their mission. 28 men now stood on a floating ice floe in the middle of the Antarctic Ocean. No ship, no shelter. Winter approaching, and the nearest land was hundreds of miles away. Shackleton faced an impossible choice. They could try to walk to Paulet Island, 350 miles northwest. There was an emergency supply cache there, left by a previous expedition. Or they could stay on the ice floe and hope it drifted closer to land. Shackleton chose to walk. They loaded the lifeboats onto sleds and began hauling them across the ice. 28 men, pulling boats that weighed over 1,000 pounds each. But the ice wasn't solid. Sometimes they'd break through into freezing water. Sometimes leads of open water would appear, forcing them to detour for miles. After just a few days, they had covered barely 7 miles. At this rate, it would take years to reach Paulet Island. Shackleton made another decision. They would camp on the ice and let it drift. They would sail north on their floating ice island and hope it brought them closer to safety. For the next 5 months, that's exactly what they did. They named their camp Patience Camp. Life on the ice was brutal. Food was running low. They rationed themselves to 1 biscuit per day. When that ran out, they hunted seals and penguins. When even those became scarce, they made the heartbreaking decision to shoot the sled dogs. The dogs had been companions for over a year. Some of the men wept as they pulled the trigger. Temperatures dropped to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Frostbite was common. Men's faces became so swollen from exposure that they could barely swallow food, and the ice beneath them was constantly shifting, cracking, breaking apart. Several times, men woke up to find their tent had split in half during the night, with freezing water rushing in. But somehow, Shackleton kept them together. He maintained routines. He kept morale up. He made every man believe they would survive. In April 1916, 16 months after leaving civilization, their ice floe finally drifted close enough to land. They launched the 3 lifeboats and rowed for Elephant Island. Elephant Island was uninhabited, barren, just rocks and ice, but it was land. Solid ground. For the first time in 497 days, the men stood on something that wasn't floating. They were safe. ... for now. But Elephant Island had no food, no shelter, and no chance of rescue. No ships ever came here. They could starve to death waiting for help that would never arrive. Shackleton made one final, desperate decision. He would take 5 men and sail 800 miles to South Georgia Island where the whaling station was. They would sail in one of the small lifeboats across some of the most dangerous ocean on Earth. The Drake Passage. Waves regularly reached 60 feet. Winds exceeded 100 miles per hour. Ships avoided this route because of the extreme danger. Shackleton was planning to cross it in a 22-foot lifeboat. On April 24, 1916, Shackleton and 5 crew members pushed off from Elephant Island in the lifeboat James Caird. 22 men remained behind, praying their leader would return. For these 6 days, Shackleton and his 5 companions battled the Southern Ocean. Waves towered above them 90 feet high. The small boat climbed each wave, teetered at the crest, then plunged down the other side. Ice formed on everything. The men had to constantly chip it away, or the boat would become too heavy and sink. They had no GPS, no modern navigation equipment, just a sextant and compass. They navigated by the sun and stars when they could see them through the constant clouds and spray. They were soaked to the skin. Hypothermia was constant. Frostbite blackened their fingers and toes. But they kept rowing. On May 10, 1916, after the SSA's days and 800 miles, they spotted land. South Georgia Island. But they had landed on the wrong side of the island. The whaling station was on the opposite coast, separated by unmapped, glacier-covered mountains that had never been crossed. They had no choice. They had to climb. Shackleton, along with 2 others, began climbing the mountains of South Georgia Island. For 36 hours straight, they climbed. No sleep, no rest. If they stopped, they would freeze to death. They climbed glaciers. They slid down icy slopes. They waded through freezing streams. Finally, on May 20th, 1916, they stumbled into the whaling station at The whalers didn't recognize them. These 3 men looked like ghosts, gaunt, filthy, covered in ice and grime. When Shackleton identified himself, the whaling station manager was shocked. Everyone had assumed the entire Endurance expedition was dead, but Shackleton had no time to rest. 22 men were still stranded on Elephant Island. Shackleton tried 3 times to reach Elephant Island. 3 times, pack ice forced him back. Finally, on August 30th, 1916, 4.5 months after leaving them, Shackleton's ship approached Elephant Island. From a distance, he could see smoke rising from the beach, a signal fire, but he didn't know how many men were still alive. As the ship drew closer, figures appeared on the beach. 1, 2, 3... ... Shackleton counted 22 men. All of them, every single one, still alive. Against all odds, not a single member of the Endurance expedition had died. On August 8, 1914, the Endurance had set sail from England. On September 3, 1916, 2 years and 26 days later, the last crew members returned home. Shackleton had failed his mission. He never crossed Antarctica. He never even set foot on the continent. But he had accomplished something far greater. He had kept 28 men alive through 2 years of unimaginable hardship. He had maintained morale, discipline, and hope when there was no rational reason for hope to exist. When asked later how he did it, Shackleton said simply, "Optimism is true moral courage." His leadership during the Enduran expedition became the gold standard for crisis management. Business schools teach his methods. Military academies study his decisions. Because Ernest Shackleton proved that leadership isn't about achieving goals. It's about bringing people home. In March 2022, to 107 years after it sank, the wreck of the Endurance was discovered. It sits 10,000 feet below the surface of the Weddell Sea, remarkably well preserved in the frigid Antarctic water. The name Endurance is still clearly visible on the stern, the ship that symbolized human endurance. Endured. Who's like the 28 men who sailed on her, just like the impossible survival story that began with a crushing defeat and ended with a triumphant return. 28 men. 2 years. 0 casualties. The greatest survival story ever told. This has been Nitrodon Monoxide Signal. Until next time, stay resilient.